Picture a world where every fever is a mystery. A world where a simple scratch from a farm tool or the bite of a stray dog is a terrifying death sentence. A world where milk spoils without warning, where surgeons, fresh from autopsies, deliver babies without washing their hands, and the vast, silent kingdom of microorganisms is completely unknown. This was the world of the early 19th century, and into this world, on a cold December morning in 1822, a child was born in the small town of Dole, France. His name was Louis Pasteur. He was not a born genius. One of his teachers reportedly called him the meekest, smallest, and least promising pupil in my class. He was an average student, but with one extraordinary gift, a profound and patient talent for observation. Before he ever touched a microscope, his tool was a paintbrush. As a teenager, he created detailed, sensitive pastel portraits of his family and neighbors, works that captured the light in an eye, the texture of skin. This was the first glimpse of the mind that would later isolate the invisible. He saw what others didn't. His father, a tanner who had fought in Napoleon's army, instilled in him a fierce patriotism and a deep belief in hard work. But the local people whispered to his father, "Too bad he's wasting his time on this useless science." They couldn't see the path ahead. Louis initially aimed for a prestigious teaching career, moving to Paris for his studies. But his true calling was revealed not in a grand lecture hall, but in a quiet laboratory, peering at crystals through a polarizing lens. But what could the shape of a crystal possibly have to do with saving a life from a rabid dog or preventing a child from dying of infected milk? This was the first fragile thread that Pasteur would follow into the darkness. His early scientific work was in the field of crystallography. He became fascinated by tartaric acid, a compound found in winemaking sediments. Some batches of this acid rotated light to the right, while others, which seemed chemically identical, had no effect on light at all. It was a scientific riddle. For months, Pasteur meticulously examined the tiny crystals under a magnifying glass, his artist's eye searching for a clue. And then he saw it. The inactive crystals had smooth, symmetrical facets, but the active ones, they had tiny, asymmetrical facets, like mirror images of each other. With a steady hand and a pair of tweezers, he painstakingly separated the two types. This was a monumental discovery, molecular asymmetry, the foundation of stereochemistry. He had shown that the very architecture of a molecule could determine its properties in the living world. It proved that the deepest secrets of nature could be found through meticulous observation and experiment. This triumph earned him early recognition, a professorship, and a move to the University of Strasbourg. There, he met and married Marie Laurent, the rector's daughter, who would become his lifelong partner and indispensable support. In 1854, seeking new challenges, Pasteur moved his young family to Lille, an industrial city, to become dean of a new science faculty. His mandate was to connect science with industry. Soon, a local businessman named Bigot came to him with a problem. His factory was fermenting beet juice into alcohol, but the batches kept souring, turning into undrinkable acidic slop. Bigot was losing a fortune. He asked the young chemist for help. Pasteur visited the vats. He took samples of the healthy ferment and the sour ferment back to his lab. Under his microscope, the healthy ferment teemed with plump, round yeast cells, but the sour ferment was different. It was filled with smaller, rod-shaped particles. They were alive, and they were multiplying. Pasteur had a stunning revelation. The souring wasn't a random chemical breakdown. It was a war, a microscopic invasion. The rods were a different living organism, lactic acid ferment, that was outcompeting the yeast. This discovery was the birth of modern microbiology. Fermentation was not a mysterious chemical process, it was the work of living microbes. Yet, if invisible creatures could turn wine sour, what else were they capable of? This question would force Pasteur to confront one of humanity's oldest and most stubbornly held beliefs. His work on fermentation put him on a collision course with a centuries-old dogma, the theory of spontaneous generation. This was the belief that life could simply arise from non-living matter, that maggots sprang from rotting meat, and microbes bubbled up spontaneously from sterile broth. The scientific establishment, including influential figures like Félix Pouchet, defended it fiercely. Pasteur, armed with his germ theory of fermentation, knew they were wrong. To prove it, he designed an experiment of elegant simplicity. He created a nutrient broth, boiled it to kill any life, and poured it into a special flask he designed himself. This flask had a long, thin neck, curved like a swan's neck. Air could flow in, but dust and microbes, which Pasteur believed were floating in the air, would settle in the dip of the neck. The broth remained perfectly clear and sterile for months. But when he tilted the flask, allowing the broth to touch the contaminated dust trapped in the neck, the broth quickly clouded with microbial life. The conclusion was undeniable. Life came from life. Microbes were everywhere, riding on dust particles, and they were the true agents of change, of spoilage, and, Pasteur was beginning to suspect, of disease. This was the seed of the germ theory of disease.
His fame now growing, Pasteur was called back to Paris to lead the École Normale Supérieure. But triumph was shattered by profound personal tragedy. 3 of his 5 beloved daughters died in childhood, 2 from typhoid fever, a waterborne illness caused by the very microbes he was studying. Science became more than an intellectual pursuit. It was a weapon forged in grief. He soon faced a national crisis. France's vital silk industry was collapsing. Silkworms were dying by the millions from a strange disease called pébrine. The government begged Pasteur for help. He knew nothing about silkworms. He traveled south, set up a makeshift lab, and got to work. For agonizing years, through painstaking microscopy and breeding experiments, he untangled not 1, but 2 distinct diseases. More importantly, he showed they were contagious and caused by specific microorganisms. His solution was brutally simple but effective: identify and destroy infected moths and eggs to stop the spread. He saved the industry. This practical triumph cemented the link in his mind: specific germs cause specific diseases. Armed with this conviction, Pasteur was ready to take on a killer that stalked every farm and kitchen. But could a simple application of heat really conquer an invisible army, and would anyone believe him? The practical application of his germ theory was already brewing. France's winemakers were desperate. Their precious wines were spoiling during shipment. Pasteur, at the request of Emperor Napoleon III, turned his microscope to the problem. Again, he found his culprits: unwanted microbes ruining the vintage. The solution was not a complex chemical, but controlled heat. By gently heating the wine to a specific temperature, he could kill the harmful microbes without ruining the flavor. He called the process pasteurization. The concept was revolutionary. It meant decay was not inevitable. Humanity could fight back. This principle was soon applied to milk, saving countless children from tuberculosis, scarlet fever, and other deadly diseases born in contaminated dairy. For the first time in history, food could be made safer. Yet, Pasteur's gaze was fixed on an even greater frontier. If microbes cause disease, could the body be taught to defeat them before they struck? The answer came from a forgotten flask and an observant mind. In 1879, Pasteur was studying chicken cholera, a fast-killing poultry disease. Before a holiday, he instructed an assistant to inject chickens with a fresh bacterial culture. The assistant forgot. The culture sat on the lab bench for weeks. Upon returning, the assistant used this old, stale culture. The chickens got sick, but they didn't die. Later, when Pasteur challenged the same chickens with a fresh, virulent culture, they remained healthy. Pasteur's mind, prepared by years of work, saw the truth instantly. The old culture had attenuated, its virulence had weakened. By exposing the chickens to this harmless version, he had taught their immune systems to recognize and destroy the deadly version. He had created an artificial vaccine. He famously declared, "Chance only favors the prepared mind." This was no accident. It was discovery waiting for a discoverer. He had a method. Now he needed a public battle. He would stage a dramatic experiment in a field outside Paris, betting his reputation against a microscopic monster that was killing farmers and their flocks. The monster was anthrax, a terrifying disease that could wipe out entire herds of sheep and jump to humans. Pasteur prepared an attenuated anthrax vaccine, but skeptics, especially the powerful German microbiologist Robert Koch, mocked him. To prove them wrong, Pasteur agreed to a spectacular public trial at a farm in Puy-le-Fort in the spring of 1881.
The world watched. On one side, 24 sheep, 1 goat, and 6 cows were vaccinated with Pasteur's preparation. On the other side, the control group of animals was left unprotected. Weeks later, all the animals were injected with a powerful, lethal dose of anthrax. Within 2 days, the result was horrifyingly clear. Every single control animal was dead or dying, but every single vaccinated animal stood healthy in the field, grazing calmly. It was an irrefutable, visceral triumph. Germ theory was no longer just a theory, it was a technology of salvation. But Pasteur, now in his 60s and partially paralyzed from a stroke, was not finished. He turned to humanity's most feared disease, rabies. The horror of hydrophobia, the panic, the paralysis, the certain death had haunted civilizations for millennia. The microbe was too small to be seen, filtering through porcelain, likely a virus. How could you vaccinate against a ghost? Pasteur developed a daring and macabre method. He grew the virus in the spinal cords of live rabbits, then weakened it by drying the cords in sterile air. He created a series of injections, starting with the most attenuated cord and progressing to stronger ones. He successfully protected dogs, but the leap to humans was a terrifying ethical chasm. Then, on July 6, 1885, a desperate mother arrived from Alsace with her 9-year-old son, Joseph Meister. He had been savagely bitten 14 times by a rabid dog. Faced with a dying boy, Pasteur had to make an impossible choice. The boy was doomed. The medical doctors Grancher and Vulpian confirmed it. Pasteur was not a physician. Administering an untested human treatment was illegal and morally perilous, but he saw no alternative. With great anguish, and after consultations, he began the agonizing series of injections. For 10 days, Pasteur barely slept, waiting for the signs of rabies to appear. They never did. Joseph Meister lived. The vaccine worked. News exploded around the globe. Pasteur, the chemist, had conquered the unconquerable. Victims from Russia and America began flooding into Paris, saved by Pasteur's treatment. An international fundraising campaign fueled by global gratitude led to the founding of the Pasteur Institute in 1888, a temple dedicated to the ongoing fight against infectious disease. His final years were spent in that institute, a living legend, but in a profound and often overlooked shift, the man who spent his life hunting the seed of disease came to a deeper understanding. On his own deathbed, suffering from complications of his stroke, he reportedly refused a treatment, reflecting, "It is the soil, not the seed." He had come to see that the germ was only part of the story. The health of the host, the soil, was equally vital. It was a final, holistic insight from a mind that never stopped questioning. Louis Pasteur died on September 28, 1895. He was buried in a cathedral, but his true monument is not made of stone. It is in the sterile surgical room where his germ theory made safe operations possible. It is in the refrigerated milk carton in your kitchen. It is in the vaccination card of every child on Earth, protecting them from diseases that once filled cemeteries. He transformed our world from a place of constant, invisible peril to one where we can see, understand, and defend ourselves. He was not a mythical, solitary genius. He was a man, driven by patriotism, wounded by loss, fueled by competition, and supported by a loyal family and team. His power was a unique fusion, the patience of an artist, the logic of a chemist, the vision of a biologist, and the unwavering courage to defend truth. He taught us that the smallest things can have the greatest power, and that one prepared, persistent human mind can, indeed, change the fate of humanity.